Okay, we're at another park now. There's a waterfall next to me, and some what do you call it? The lawnmowers tending to the grass in the garden over in the background. So there might be a little bit of a buzz, but hopefully you'll be able to hear me sufficiently. I'll speak very loud. Today we do Tanizaki Jun'ichirō's sort of essay novel or novella. It's usually regarded as an essay on aesthetics, but as I will explain here, it's one of the most misunderstood works in all of modern Japanese literature, I think. It's Tanizaki Jun'ichirō's In Praise of Shadows, or in the original陰翳礼讃, published in 1933. And Tanizaki, I think we've read one or two of his short stories already, but to review, Tanizaki Jun'ichirō, one of the major novelists of the 20th century, born in 1886, died in 1965, novelist, essayist, prolific writer whose popularity extended through the reigns of three emperors, Meiji, Taishō, and Shōwa. Tanizaki is perhaps best known for his novel Sasame Yuki, which is translated as The Makioka Sisters by Edward Seidensticker in 1957. The novel was written during the war between 1943, and actually he finished it after the war in 1948. It's a detailed account of an Osaka family that embraces a traditional bound way of life. It was the first major Japanese work of the post-war period. Tanizaki's other novels include a modern version of The Tale of Genji. Some prefer Nettles, and I'll mention that again later today. Some prefer Nettles, published in 1928. The original is Tadeku Mushi, which is translated into English in 1955. Quicksand, 1928 to 30. It was published and translated in 1994. The Key, or Kagi, translated 61. And Diary of an Old Man. And Chijin no Ai, translated as Naomi by the great Anthony Chambers, my mentor in graduate school back at Arizona State University. And there's some more biographical information there on your handout. We don't need to read it all. Okay, and then I have a warning. The warning is important. Do not read this essay,陰翳礼讃, or In Praise of Shadows, as a tract on Japanese aesthetics. That's how it's often read, but that's a grave misreading in my opinion, and in the opinions of others, scholars. Tanizaki is a novelist. Novelists perform, they make up stuff, they entertain, they play roles. Here he is playing with in this work, he is playing with the public persona of an old grumpy man who dislikes everything about modernity, about modern civilization, and who complains a lot, yet does nothing about it, and constantly fails to live up to his own standards. The key to this essay, in my view, is in the last paragraph. And another key to the essay is the novel that I just mentioned, Some Prefer Nettles, Tadeku Mushi. And in that novel, there's an old man, I forget what his name is, but he's the father of the main character, Kadame. And he's very similar to the narrator of this essay story, or whatever you want to call it. So don't read this as an aesthetic treatise by Tanizaki himself. Read the narrator, first-person narrator, as a fictional narrator. Okay, now we're going to jump right into the study questions. Once again, there are probably too many study questions here. So answer thoroughly whichever ones you think are most important, and give brief answers for the other ones. There's 23 in all. Study question number 1. The essay consists of 16 sections. Discuss this structure. How does it move from one subject to the next? What is the overarching theme? And it goes on for, I forget the exact number of pages, but it's a pretty long, rambling essay. And it seems at times to sort of go off in other directions, but there's still certain themes that string it all together. What are those themes? Question number 2. Who is the narrator? Why does he refer to himself as an old man? And keep in mind that Tanizaki himself, when he wrote this essay, was only in his mid-40s, right? So once again, he's performing the role of an old man, not unlike that old man that appears in Tadeku Mushi. Is the narrator the author? No, is what I just said. How does he resemble the old man in Tanizaki's novel Tadeku Mushi? And since I've mentioned it so many times already, you may as well read that novel as well. It's a masterpiece, one of the great novels. I teach it every other year. It's about 150 pages or so. You can read it in a day. Some prefer nettles in the English translation. Number 3, describe the tone of the essay. Where is the narrator joking, being ironic? Where is he serious? How can you tell? And there's also that, since there's distance between the author and the narrator, there's some ironic distance created there. You can talk about that in your answer to that question. Question number 4. Among the topics that the Tanizaki's narrator discusses are traditional architecture, electric lights, fans, candles, screen doors, or shoji in Japanese, electric stoves, bathrooms, blah, 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 blah. There's a long list I have there. Japanese food, ryokan, hanging scrolls, flower arrangement, ikebana, traditional Japanese rooms, the importance of silence, temple architecture, priest robes, no costumes, and ohaguro, which is the custom of blackening female teeth, and so forth. Discuss each of these and their relation to the essay's main theme, the importance of shadows. How does each example that he's illustrate the magic of shadows that he's trying to convey? Number 5, discuss the narrator's remarks on the toilets in the East. Is he being humorous or ironic here? What is he parodying? Explain. Number 6, what value does the narrator place on dirt, grime, stains, impurity, uncleanliness, oldness, rusticity, patina, etc.? What does he mean by elegance is filthy? Can these remarks be read as a challenge to the discourses of Japanese purity that were prevalent at the time? So in order to answer this question, you will need to know a little bit about 1930s Japan, about the sort of nationalistic, culturally nationalistic discourses of Japanese purity that was put forth by the government and by the military and by nationalists of all stripes and so forth. Is the narrator's insistence on the importance and beauty of grime, dirt, impurity, etc. a challenge to the cultural nationalists of the day, right? So it's often read that Tanizaki sort of gave in to pressures of the time and sort of complied with the authorities. But if you read his works of the 1930s carefully, you can find a critical edge to many of his writings. Okay, number 7. Make a list of all the binaries that appear in this work. And this is basically a question that I give for every literary work that I assign, right? In probably 90-95% of literary works that we read, we find that there are binaries that appear in it, that are contrasted, that are problematized, that are sometimes conflated or unified into a single idea. So make a list of all the binaries that appear in this work. For example, east, west, country, city, Kyoto, Tokyo, night, day, light, shadows, vulgar, elegant. That's just a few. There's probably 20 or 30 more. And explain these binaries. Are these binaries problematized or collapsed at any point in the work? Explain. Number 8. Discuss the narrator's description of the Japanese national character, or kokuminsei. What examples does he give to illustrate this so-called character, national character? What is it? Is there such a thing as a Japanese national character? I mean, in general, if you look at the broad sweep of Japanese history from, say, Nara period up through today, that whatever is regarded as the national character changes with each era, with each decade, with each generation. So it's really hard to pin down something that's essential to all of Japan throughout history. What is Japan's national character? What is your national character from whatever country you are from? It's just sort of a general reflection on the idea of national character, which is sometimes a very specious ladybug right there, concept. Number 9. Explain the narrator's comments about the possibility of an alternative modernity, of a science or technology or arts more suited to our national character. He mentions this at some point in the essay, that modernity for Japan didn't have to unfold as it unfolded. It could have been otherwise. What would this alternative look like, according to the narrator? And in your view, is an alternative modernity possible? Or is sort of capitalist modernity as it unfolded since the beginning of the 18th century, is it pretty much destined to be as it has been? Next question. According to the narrator, how did Japan's process of modernization differ from that of the West? Right. So this is sort of a continuation of 9. The process of modernization in the West and in the East. How does the narrator conceive these two processes? Number 11. This ladybug, I gotta pause for a second. Number 11. Can the essay be read as a critique of the Meiji Era ethos of civilization and enlightenment? Again, the term in Japanese is Bunmei Kaika, which I explained in one of the other videos. Is this work a critique of Bunmei Kaika? And I think we read Heisei, Tanizaki's very first work, a short story called Heisei, the Tattooer, which can be read, I think, as a critique of Meiji Era modernity, of the idea of Bunmei Kaika, of the idea of westernization and so forth. And I think you could argue the same about this work, right? So what other anti-Bunmei Kaika works have we read? And I just mentioned one, Heisei, the Tattooer, but there are others in Tanizaki's corpus and in other writers. Number 12, how does this essay relate to the return to Japan cultural movement of the 1930s? In Japanese, this is Nihon Kaiki, right? And I think it was Hagiwara Sakutaro who first coined this term in an essay that he wrote in 1930, I think, possibly a few years earlier. But the term caught on, and it reflected a sort of a general mood of Japanese of the late Taishō period and early Shōwa period, of the idea that we had basically caught up to the West and are now on equal footing with the West, and it's time now to return to our roots, whatever those might be, right? And you see that theme played out in philosophy, in literature, in art, in all kinds of areas. And you see traces of it here, but it's not simply a let's go back to old Japan message. It's more complex than that. And Tanizaki understands the idea of return to Japan, of Nihon Kaiki, in a more complex way. So explain how that theme plays out in this essay fictional work. Does the work challenge or subvert this dominant discourse in any way? Explain. Number 13 is a question about China and to lesser extent India. How is China and India described in this essay? Basically the idea of the Orient or the East. How does the narrator view the traditional paper, jade, food, and crystals of China? Is the China he describes the China of 1933? Or is it the China of an ancient past? Or is it just some fantasy that he's sort of making up, right? So this again relates to the binary question of East and West. How does he conceive of these in this story, in this work? Number 14, explain the phrase elegance is frigid, which appears toward the middle, I think. How do these remarks about elegance compare with other treatises on elegance written around the same time? And I'm thinking mainly of the famous one by Sato Haruo called Furyu Ron, right? Elegance in Japanese is Furyu, which is originally a Chinese term, Feng Liao, I forget how to pronounce it, Feng Liao, I think. And it became sort of a big word in the late 1920s and early 30s, mid-30s. How does it compare with that? Obviously, you have to read Sato Haruo's essay in order to do that. So don't worry about the comparison. Just think about this idea of elegance, of furyu, in the context of this story. Number 15, explain the narrator's view of the relationship between beauty and everyday life, material conditions, fudo, which is the sort of natural geographical conditions of a country or of a region. Discuss the significance of the line, the quality that we call beauty, however, must always grow from the realities of life, right? So this idea of fudo is important. You might want to look into that. There's a famous book about fudo gaku, fudo, written by Watsuji Tetsudo in 1935, I think, that talks about this, and his ideas became fairly popular in Japan. So you will, yes, I won't say any more about that. You can look into it. Number 16 is discuss the narrator's description of Japanese women and female beauty. This is a very important question, and it's pretty much the important question in all of Tanizaki's writings. The idea of the ideal woman, female beauty. What are the defining features of the typical woman of old, in his words, that he talks about on page 29? How does he recall his mother, right? So there are a lot of characters in Tanizaki's novels that sort of idealize their mothers and their mother's beauty and whatnot. And you see aspects of that in this work as well. Number 17, The narrator makes numerous generalizations. For example, such is our way of thinking. We find beauty not in the thing itself, but in the patterns of shadows, the light and the darkness that one thing against another creates. Are such generalizations verifiable, consistent with evidence? Is it true that the West has placed less of a value on shadows? Doesn't Western art abound in shadows? Think, for example, of Edgar Allan Poe or Charles Baudelaire or the Gothic writers or the fin de siècle, the end of the century writers, or romantic symbolist poets, or the chiaroscuro in Renaissance paintings, or the extreme chiaroscuro technique used in paintings by Caravaggio, El Greco, Rembrandt, and the idea of shadows that appear in Shakespeare's works. One could go on and on, but according to Tanizaki's narrator in this work, the West values light more than it does shadows. Is there any truth to this, or is it just sort of a wild generalization? Yes, his claim that East equals shadows, West equals light. Is there any truth to that? And on page 31 he writes, "We Orientals find beauty not only in the thing itself, but in the pattern of the shadows, the light and shadows which the thing provides." Alright, so discuss that idea. Number 18. Discuss the narrator's concept of race and skin colors and their relation to cloudiness and grime. What contemporary racial discourses are evoked in the essay? I should say contemporaneous racial discourses, right? So you'll have to sort of know a little bit about the racial discourses that existed in the 1920s and 1930s Japan, and compare those with the ideas espoused by the narrator in this work. Explain. Number 19. Discuss the connection between the narrator's description of women as white, disembodied, ethereal faces wrapped in darkness, and the female characters in Tanizaki's fiction. Is it true that women exhale or exude darkness from their orifices, bodies? Alright, so this sort of is a question that applies to a wide range of Tanizaki's work, so you might want to look into those in order to answer this question. But in this, in Praise of Shadows, there's a passage that says, "The darkness wrapped round her tenfold, 20-fold. It filled the collar, the sleeves of her kimono, the folds of her skirt, wherever a hollow invited. Further yet, might it not have been the reverse? Might not the darkness have emerged from her mouth, and those black teeth from the black of her hair, like the thread from the great earth spider?" Number 20. Okay, 3 more to go and then we're done. The narrator decries Japan as the world's second greatest waster, second only to America, waster of energy and electricity. How might we read these remarks today in the wake of the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear crisis? What might Tanizaki's answer to the current crisis be? What does the narrator recommend for keeping cool in the summer? 21. In the final section, the narrator compares himself to the old griping women of England who complain about the modern age. How is he similar? And that comparison that he makes shows that he's sort of self-aware, that he's aware that his ideas are kind of funny and crazy and wild, and not unlike the gripings of old women in England. Page 20, question number 22. On page 9, the narrator states that behind shadows is a mere void. In other words, that shadows are the reality, or more real, in fact, than the object that casts them. In what other works of this period have we seen this sort of Platonic idea? The idea that or anti-Platonic idea, I should say. The idea that the representation is, or the picture, or the image is more real than that which projects it, right? And specifically I have in mind the story by Tanizaki called Aozukashi no Hanashi, or in English, Mr. Blue Mound. But we also see in Kajimoto Jiro's stories, in Hagiwara's Sakutaro's Neko Machi, and others. So explain this sort of anti-Platonic idea in the context of this story. And the final question. The last paragraph is the key to the entire essay. After reading this paragraph, what do you think the essay's actual or implicit subject is? What are shadows a metaphor for, right? So this idea of shadows, which appears in the title, of course,陰翳礼讃.陰翳is sort of a fancy sinographic word for shadows in Japanese. But shadows are not just simply the physical manifestation of shadows, but they're used as a kind of metaphor for something else. So what are shadows a metaphor for? And here is the final paragraph. I am aware of and most grateful for the benefits of the age. No matter what complaints we may have, Japan has chosen to follow the West, and there is nothing for her to do but move bravely ahead and leave us old ones behind. But we must be resigned to the fact that as long as our skin is the color it is, the loss we have suffered cannot be remedied. I have written all this because I have thought that there might still be somewhere, possibly in literature or the arts, where something could be saved. I would call back, at least for literature, this world of shadows we are losing. In the mansion called literature, I would have the eaves deep and the walls dark. I would push back into the shadows the things that came forward too clearly. I would strip away the useless decoration. I do not ask that this be done everywhere, but perhaps we may be allowed at least one mansion where we could turn off the electric lights and see what it is like without them. And with that passage, the sort of fictional essay treatise ends. And further reading, I have here cited a book by Margarita Long called This Perversion Called Love, reading Tanizaki, Feminist Theory, and Freud. And I think there's one chapter in that book about this. But there's numerous other articles and essays and so forth about this very famous work. So you might want to look into that. And again, when you look into scholarship about specific literary works, the two best sources online or systems online are CINII, which is the Japanese one for looking up articles and papers that are written in Japanese. CINII, just type that in Google and it'll come up. And the English one, of course, is JSTOR. So go to JSTOR, go to CINII, and look up Tanizaki and his works, and you'll find secondary sources about this work. Okay, that concludes our commentary on the study guide for Tanizaki's In Praise of Shadows. If you have any questions, email me. Bye-bye.